How do we see that perception of value chains changing? I think some of the things that we've seen is the need to look beyond isolated value chains. Value chains don't exist in isolation. So, for example, the maize value chain links very much with horticulture or the legumes, whatever is intercropped. It's also a major input into the livestock sector. Often in many countries, it's also the best way to intervene in that value chain, maybe through some other value chain or through other system. And so I think broadening our perspective of what we need to tackle to make value chains effective in terms of poverty reduction and economic growth in rural areas, I think is really broadening. So we're starting to see a focus on the interactions between value chains. We're starting to look at some of those broader multiplier effects, so expanding out to some of the services that make that value chain effective, as well as some of the things that we can do to increase its potential to generate labor. Looking a little bit more of some of those interrelated sectors, maybe it's infrastructure, maybe it's the health sector. Not that we would try and tackle all those through a value chain project, but that we would start to take into account the fact that there are constraints in associated systems that we really need to look into. And that might mean collaboration with other parts of the agency, other kinds of projects, other donors, and so on. I think something else that we're really seeing is that, obviously we're not really trying to create effective value chains for their own sake, but we're trying to affect poverty. And I think something that we've seen is that value chain projects often help the poor, but not the very poor. And so looking at ways that we can help value chains to reach down further to the poor, and maybe breaking apart some of those household dynamics. Something that we've seen through a number of evaluations recently is that there are income increases on the farm level, and these are not being mirrored at the household level. So there are questions about, well, where is that income going? Who's benefiting from that income? And so that's questions we want to look at too. So a real broadening of what we think about and what we include in our model when we're approaching value chain development, I think is something that I think one of the things that we're realizing, there's been a lot of research in recent years around systems and the way systems work and the way they function. USAID has done a lot of work in that, particularly through PPL, looking at systems and the way they function, different kinds of systems. And something that we're really learning is that if you want system change, rather than just isolated pockets of change, you really need to have different approaches for different kinds of systems. So there are systems that are pretty simple and you can just do X and get Y. There are lots of systems that are much more complicated where we think we understand what's happening, but maybe we don't. We need that kind of ongoing analysis. Maybe we don't have all the answers up front. And there are other kinds of systems that we might call complex systems where we're dealing with things like behavior change, where there's no right and wrong. You can't promise to do X and you'll definitely get Y. So you've got to experiment a lot more, try a lot of things, be much more proactive about learning as you go and monitoring what changes are happening. Is that what you expected? Is it leading to the kind of outputs that you thought you would get, the kind of changes that you expected? So I think some of the implications are that we need to have that broader perspective. We need to have analysis that's not just upfront, pre-project design or as part of that design process, but needs to keep going throughout project implementation. I think we need more flexibility in looking at what works and what doesn't. Not that those impacts that we're looking for, that they shouldn't be changing. Obviously, we know what we're trying to achieve, but the tactics, the actual activities that we carry out to reach those objectives, what we think at the beginning might work, we may actually be wrong. So flexibility to change some of those lower level activities as we go along, I think will be really important. Sure. So there's lots of intersections between value chains that we're realizing are really connected. So an example from Asia would be aquaculture and rice production, where we see real synergy between those two value chains and a value in addressing them together that we wouldn't get by dealing with them on their own in isolation. Similarly in Africa, lots of connections between grains and food staples, particularly maize, and horticulture. In a lot of places, obviously there's the agronomic synergy around intercropping, but also a lot of smallholder farmers will grow maize to the point where they feel sufficiently secure that they can invest their resources in things like horticulture is a little bit more risky. And so the connection between the two, rather than just having a project that's purely on maize or purely on horticulture, but the value of bringing those two together and working with them together can be very, very strong.